Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show, built to deliver the knowledge you need without all the fluff. We take those really dense legal texts, that complex research, and we just distill it.
We break it down.
Exactly. So you can grasp the core insights quickly and, thoroughly.
Right. So today we are undertaking it's a fascinating and incredibly intricate deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We're immersing ourselves in the centuries-old legal framework that governs Islamic marriage, which is known as Nikah.
And the dowry as well, the mahr.
And the mandatory financial obligation, the dowry or nature.
Absolutely. And this isn't just, some abstract theory. This is a foundational legal system. It's governed family life for well over 1,000 years.
It has.
And our source material today, it takes us right into the heart of these rulings, and primarily through the lens of one of the four major schools of thought, Hanafi jurisprudence.
And a Hanafi school it's particularly important because it so often represents a highly pragmatic and, I'd say, socially sensitive approach to law, which we'll see, contrasted pretty sharply with other schools like the Shafi'i or the Maliki traditions as we go.
Exactly. So our mission today is to give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. We want to help you grasp the foundational principles of the contract itself, some of the prohibitions, which are, frankly, sometimes surprising.
They can be.
And most importantly, the key legal and philosophical disagreements that really define this whole tradition. You'll walk away understanding not just the rules, but the why behind them.
And that nuance, that why, that's everything. I mean, when we talk about Islamic marital law, the foundation is obviously the Quran and the Sunnah.
Right.
But the detailed legal implementation, the rulings that govern actual real-life cases, that all comes from these schools, the madahib.
And by understanding where they disagree.
Yes. For example, Hanafi's emphasis on social reality versus, say, Shafi'i's on procedural perfection. Once you get that, you unlock the entire judicial philosophy.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately then. Let's start with the very first step. Establishing a valid contract. So the marriage contract, the nikah, it has to be established with meticulous legal precision. It's built on mutual consent. You've got the offer ijab and the acceptance qabul.
Right.
This seems straightforward, but what is that first crucial legal hurdle that makes this different from just any normal agreement?
It's the language itself. The key detail, and you can't overstate this, is the required linguistic tense.
The tense.
Yes. For the contract to be instantly binding and valid, the offer and acceptance must be established using past tense terms.
Okay, so wait. So we're not looking at a promise for the future, like, I will marry you.
No, absolutely not.
We're looking at an immediate declaration of an accomplished legal fact. The man says, marry me, and her response has to be something like, I have married you, or I have accepted.
Correct. That shift from a future intention to a completed fact is completely deliberate. It formalizes the transaction, makes it instant and decisive.
It removes any ambiguity.
It removes ambiguity, any conditionality, any space for someone changing their mind later. It just locks the contract in right then and there. And this leads directly to a very specific set of acceptable terminology.
Right. So if you use the wrong terms, even if you clearly mean marriage, the whole contract could be invalid.
It could be, yes.
So what are the terms that actually work? What validates the union in Hanafi jurisprudence?
Well, the sources confirm the two most valid and recommended terms are nikah, which is marriage, and tazwij, which is matrimony.
Okay.
However, the Hanafi school is generally broader in scope. It validates the contract even if terms are used that just imply the ownership or transfer of a lawful relationship.
Like what?
Specifically hiba, which means gift, tamlik, meaning ownership, and sadaqah, which is charity.
Now, this is where you, as a listener, might pause. Hiba and tamlik, gift and ownership, that sounds almost commercial. It seems completely at odds with the sacred nature of marriage.
It does.
So how did the scholars defend that kind of terminology?
That's a really probing question, and it gets right to the core of the legal interpretation. The scholars argue that these terms are acceptable because they are being used metaphorically.
Ah, metaphorically.
They don't imply ownership of the person, but rather the exclusive lawful ownership of the relationship and the sexual right. The man is essentially accepting the responsibility and the legal right to form a family. That's what validates them.
So it's the intention that sanctifies the metaphor. But if those terms, which are, pretty close to commerce, are valid, what terms are explicitly forbidden and why?
Certain commercial or temporary terms are seen as explicitly destructive to the marital contract's intent. The contract is immediately invalid if terms like ijara, which is a lease,
A lease?
yes, or ibaha, permission, ihala, which is a transfer, or wasiya, a bequest, are used.
Using a term like lease ijara, it's like trying to use a short-term rental agreement for a permanent family deed.
Okay.
The law just sees the contradiction in intent and rejects the whole thing.
Precisely. A lease and permission imply temporary use, which fundamentally contradicts the sacred and perpetual, or at least not explicitly temporary nature of nikah.
And a bequest.
A bequest implies the contract depends on death or some future event, which invalidates the immediate certainty that the past tense requires.
Now, I saw a fascinating exception noted in our sources about the term bay, which is sale. If commercial terms are generally off limits, why on earth is the term bay considered valid, even if it's discouraged, in the Hanafi school?
It's another brilliant example of the Hanafi willingness to interpret language metaphorically to sort of salvage the contract.
Okay.
Bay implies a binding, irreversible transfer, which is the necessary legal effect of nikah. So they interpret it as the sale of the lawful right to intimacy and family formation. But, as you noted, it is strongly discouraged.
Because it just sounds bad.
It diminishes the sanctity of the union. It reduces it to a transaction. So they uphold the legal effect, but they really disapprove of the linguistic choice.
All right, so from terminology, we move to physical presence, witnesses. This is a crucial public affirmation of the contract. So what are the minimum baseline Hanafi requirements for witnesses?
Under the dominant Hanafi view, two things are necessary. First, you must have at least 2 witnesses present.
Okay.
And second, they must be free, rational, adult Muslims. The accepted gender ratio, which adheres to general standards of testimony, is either 2 male witnesses or 1 male and 2 female witnesses.
But this requirement, especially about the type of witness, this is where the deep philosophical debate really begins, right? It all centers on moral character or adl. What's the core disagreement on witness eligibility?
This is the perfect illustration of contrasting judicial philosophies. You've got idealism versus pragmatism. The debate is basically, must the witnesses be morally perfect to validate a sacred contract?
And on one side, you have Imam Shafi'i.
Imam Shafi'i, representing the more idealist approach, requires the witnesses to be of upright moral character, adl. For him, a monumental contract like marriage needs the highest possible integrity in its documentation. If a witness is known to be a public sinner or unreliable, the whole contract is weakened.
So he's holding the process to a very high moral standard. Now, contrast that with the founder of the school we're focused on, Imam Abu Hanifa.
Imam Abu Hanifa takes a radically more inclusive, some would even say pragmatic view. He accepts testimony even from non-just witnesses, those who might lack that strict standard of adl, even those previously punished for serious slander or kuf.
Wait, hold on. If the Shafi'i view protects the integrity of the contract through moral purity, how does Abu Hanifa defend accepting a witness who might have previously lied or committed slander? Isn't that just risking fraud in a foundational social institution?
That's the intellectual challenge, isn't it? And the rationale is profoundly centered on social stability and reality. Abu Hanifa prioritized establishing the legal fact of marriage and protecting lineage over the moral perfection of the testifiers.
So the outcome is more important than the process.
Essentially, yes. If the couple consented and witnesses were physically present, the marriage should be upheld. Requiring some strict, almost inaccessible moral standard of adl might invalidate countless real marriages. It would create chaos in lineage, property, and social status. It's a defense of the community's welfare over an individual's moral failing.
So if I'm tracking, Shafi'i says, the process has to be morally perfect.
Yes.
And Abu Hanifa says, the outcome has to be socially stable. It's a massive philosophical difference.
It is, precisely. And just to complete the spectrum of thought, Imam Malik offered a compelling alternative. He stipulated that a public announcement issue of the marriage was sufficient instead of requiring 2 specific formal witnesses.
So for him it was more about community validation.
Exactly. The public nature of the union is the ultimate safeguard against secrecy and fraud.
Fascinating. Now let's look at a complex edge case. Non-Muslim witnesses. What happens in the scenario of a Muslim man marrying a non-Muslim woman living under Islamic rule, where the witnesses are also non-Muslim?
This is a point where the Hanafi school itself splits, which highlights the complexity of intercommunity affairs in early Islamic society. Abu Hanifa and his major student Abu Yusuf ruled that the marriage is valid.
And their reasoning?
Their reasoning suggests a legal recognition of the dhimmi community's own legal realities. If the witnesses were trustworthy within their own community, they suffice for the Muslim contracting party in this specific instance.
But not everyone agreed with that.
No. Two other major students of Abu Hanifa, Muhammad and Zafar, ruled that the marriage is invalid if the witnesses are non-Muslim. They insisted that because the groom is Muslim and the contract is ultimately governed by Islamic law, the witnesses must meet the minimum Islamic standard of being Muslim regardless of the bride's faith.
That subtle disagreement, validity versus invalidity, based on the witness's faith, must have had serious implications for families, depending on which judge was enforcing the law in their region.
Absolutely. And finally, there's one major exception here concerning the power of the father. The source notes that a father marrying off his minor daughter is a unique case.
Because in this specific context, the father is acting as both the direct party and the guardian, correct?
Yes. Due to the assumption of complete altruistic authority vested in the father or grandfather over minors, the marriage can be valid even with only one witness present. The law grants the father a special status that effectively minimizes the procedural requirement for external witness verification.
Okay, that gives us the structure of the contract. So now that we know how to form a valid contract, let's explore the deep and ancient laws governing who is prohibited from marrying whom. So, permanent prohibitions. These are absolute bars to marriage drawn directly from the Quranic text in Surah An-Nisa, verse 23, and from Hadith. What are the three main categories here?
They are the three non-negotiable foundations of prohibition: blood relatives, or nazab; affinity, which are in-law relations, or musahara; and relations established through fosterage, rada.
The blood relatives are pretty straightforward, but it's important to list them to show the scope.
Right. They prohibit mothers, grandmothers, daughters, granddaughters, sisters, nieces, both paternal and maternal maternal aunts.
So it's basically preventing any marriage within the immediate family and vertically and horizontally extended lineage.
That's a good way to put it, yes.
Now, affinity relations, the in-laws, this is where the complexity increases. Because the prohibition often hinges on whether the marriage was just a contract or if it was actually, physically established.
That distinction is critical. Take the mother of the wife, the mother-in-law. She is forbidden instantly and permanently, regardless of whether the marriage was ever consummated.
Really? The moment the contract is signed?
The moment the contract is signed, the prohibition takes effect. The law treats the mother-in-law as prohibited through the contract itself.
But the stepdaughter, the daughter of the wife from a previous marriage, she's treated differently.
Correct. The daughter of the wife, the stepdaughter, is only prohibited if the marriage was physically realized or consummated. If the man contracts the marriage but then divorces the mother before ducal consummation, he is still permitted to marry the daughter later on.
Why that difference? Why does the mother-in-law become forbidden on contract alone, but the stepdaughter requires physical consummation?
Well, the mother-in-law is considered part of the core familial unit being established through that initial bond. The stepdaughter is an addition, and the legal prohibition only kicks in when the man has entered into the physical reality of that marital home. It ties the establishment of the prohibition directly to the establishment of the physical family unit.
I see. And this also includes stepmothers and daughters-in-law.
Yes, the wives of fathers and grandfathers and the wives of sons and grandsons are also permanently prohibited.
Finally, we have to discuss fosterage, or rada. This is one of the most remarkable legal concepts, where an act of nursing creates a permanent, non-biological family tie.
It's a profound legal fiction, and it's rooted in the famous prophetic construction. Breastfeeding makes unlawful what blood relations make unlawful.
So if a woman breastfed a child,
She becomes legally the foster mother, and her biological children become foster siblings to the child she nursed. The law is then applied absolutely. Any marriage prohibited by blood is equally prohibited by rada forever.
okay, moving beyond permanent prohibitions based on personal relationship, the law also imposes some temporary prohibitions. These seem to be aimed at maintaining social harmony. Let's start with combination.
Combination prohibitions prevent simultaneous marriages that would lead to immediate family discord. It's explicitly forbidden to marry two sisters together. That's based on a direct Quranic text.
Right.
And similarly, a man cannot simultaneously marry a woman and her paternal or maternal aunt.
This makes perfect sense in terms of just, domestic peace, but what's the legal rationale for prohibiting marriage to a woman and her aunt?
The sources explain this beautifully. The law aims to prevent the natural kinship bond from being corrupted by rivalry. If a woman and her aunt were co-wives, they would be vying for the same husband's affection and resources.
Which would obviously strain the niece-aunt relationship.
It would destroy it. The law steps in to ensure Those pre-existing, non-marital kinship bonds remain intact and free from that kind of domestic strife.
Okay, here's where the philosophical rubber really meets the legal road, and the disagreements are fierce. Prohibitions due to illicit relations, specifically the legal consequences of zina or fornication on who you can marry later.
This is a highly contested area. It reveals deep splits in judicial philosophy. The question is, does an illicit act create a legal consequence in terms of who you can lawfully marry later on?
Let's start with the highly cautious, expansive position of the Hanafi school.
The Hanafi school takes a position of extreme precaution. A man who commits zina with a woman is permanently forbidden from marrying her mother or her daughter. The core logic is something like, since intercourse establishes lineage, even unlawful intercourse should extend the related marriage prohibitions to protect the possibility of latent lineage.
But the Hanafi school extends this preventative measure much further than just intercourse, right? This is where the shock factor for a modern listener comes in.
Absolutely. This is the radical extension reported by some major Hanafi scholars. The prohibition is established even by merely touching a woman with desire, or even looking at her private area with desire.
Wait, you're saying that according to this view, if a man merely looks at a woman with desire, and this is a completely subjective standard, he is immediately and permanently forbidden from marrying her mother or her daughter? That seems like an almost impossible safety buffer to maintain in social reality.
It is a massive legal hurdle, and that is precisely the point. It creates an almost insurmountable preventative barrier. It treats the intimate act of desire, which is the prelude to zina, as conceptually equivalent to the physical relation, but only for the sake of establishing the prohibition. It's a legal mechanism designed to deter moral laxity and create a vast safety net against any possibility of an incestuous mistake.
That is the epitome of the philosophy of caution. Now, give us the clean contrast. What does Imam al-Shafi say?
Imam al-Shafi rejects this entirely. He asserts that zina does not establish prohibitions of marriage. His argument is one of legal purity. Since the relationship was illicit and therefore legally null from the beginning, it can have no legal effect on a subsequent lawful contract. If it was never a marriage, it can't create the in-law prohibitions of a marriage.
So one view, the Hanafi one, says the danger of incest or confusion is so high we must impose prohibitions based on desire. The other, the Shafi view, says illicit acts cannot produce lawful consequences. That is a brilliant contrast in judicial thinking. Finally, we turn to a temporary prohibition, the waiting period, or iddah. What is the core rule regarding this period after a divorce or a death?
The iddah is mandatory for women who've been divorced or widowed. Its primary purpose is to ensure the purity of the womb, to avoid confusion of lineage, and also to allow time for reconciliation in the case of irrevocable divorce.
And the rule?
The rule is that a man cannot propose marriage implicitly or explicitly to a woman who is still in her waiting period.
There is also a very specific constraint involving the divorced woman's sister, which ties into that combination rule we just discussed.
Correct. The law explicitly forbids a man from marrying his divorced woman's sister until her iddah is fully completed. This is because the prohibition on combining two sisters has to be maintained. And during the iddah, especially a revocable one, the previous marriage is still considered legally active enough to prevent the concurrent contract.
And this leads us to another major disagreement in this section. The contrast between the Hanafi and Shafi views on when the iddah is really over for this purpose.
Yes, the Hanafi view emphasizes the lingering legal obligations. They hold that because the husband still has obligations to the woman, like providing maintenance, nafaka, during the iddah, the marriage remains indirectly active. And therefore, the prohibition against marrying her sister persists until those obligations cease and the iddah is completely over.
And what about the Shafi counterview?
Shafi argues that if the divorce is bain, which is final and irreversible, like a triple divorce, the core marriage relationship is severed instantly. While the woman must still observe iddah for purity of lineage, the immediate prohibition on combining two sisters is lifted. So under Shafi, if the divorce is final, marriage to her sister is immediately allowed, even if she's still in her iddah.
Again, we see that fundamental split. Hanafi emphasizes the lingering legal structure and obligation, while Shafi focuses on the cessation of the core marital bond itself. Now we enter what is arguably the most politically and philosophically charged area of Islamic marital law, the core debate over a woman's autonomy in marriage. Specifically, whether an adult woman needs a guardian, a wali, to contract her own marriage.
This debate is absolutely central to understanding the different schools. It reveals fundamentally contrasting views on an adult woman's legal capacity and her role within society and the family.
Let's start with the position that emphasizes the most autonomy, the Hanafi view, championed by Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf. What's their ruling?
Their view is a real hallmark of the Hanafi school. They rule that a marriage contract is fully valid with the consent of an adult, sane, free woman, even without a guardian.
Even without a wali?
Even without one. And this applies regardless of whether she's a virgin, a big, or previously married, a thayyib.
That is a radical affirmation of individual autonomy, especially considering the time period. What's the fundamental rationale they use to defend this?
The rationale is brilliant and straightforward. It's financial and legal capacity. Since an adult woman has full autonomy over her wealth, she can buy, sell, donate, and contract debts entirely on her own. She must logically also possess the right to choose her spouse.
If she can manage her millions, she can choose her partner. That makes perfect internal sense within a legal framework.
It does.
So how do the Maliki and Shafi'i schools present their counter-argument?
They take the polar opposite stance. The Maliki and Shafi'i schools argue that a woman cannot conduct her own marriage contract. A guardian is always required.
Always.
Always. Their reasoning pivots completely away from financial autonomy and focuses instead on the greater societal implications of marriage.
And what are those implications? Why does the marriage of one adult woman require the oversight of the entire family?
They argue that marriage involves honor, reputation, lineage, and the potential entry of a new member into the family. All matters that transcend the individual financial capacity of the woman. They believe that a woman, due to natural modesty or a lack of experience, might make a match that brings social disgrace, or to the family.
So you need the wali to ensure the match maintains the family honor.
That's the idea.
So we have this philosophical divide. Hanafi champions individual legal capacity, while Shafi'i and Maliki prioritize collective familial protection and social status. And this difference profoundly affects the practical mechanisms of consent.
It does indeed. I mean, just look at the mechanisms of consent, particularly concerning an adult virgin, a beaker.
The Hanafi rule regarding a virgin's consent is famous based on the cultural understanding of shyness, or haya.
Yes. Due to intense shyness, the Hanafi rule dictates that silence or laughter from a virgin when she is asked for consent is considered valid, affirmative consent.
What, weeping?
Weeping is considered an explicit refusal. The law is designed to accommodate her modesty.
And the Shafi school takes the guardian's power much further in this regard, correct?
Yes. While the Hanafi position stands firmly against forced marriage for adult women, the Shafi school asserts that an adult virgin can be compelled into marriage by her father. The reasoning is that her lack of experience in marital matters justifies the father's use of compulsion to ensure a suitable match that protects her long-term interests and the family's honor.
Okay, so regardless of who contracts the marriage, this concept of kafa compatibility or eligibility remains a kind of safety net. It's defined by our sources as a way to ensure social harmony and prevent guardians from objecting to an unsuitable match.
Kafa is an elaborate and sometimes controversial system designed to ensure that the groom is at least roughly equal to the bride's social standing. It's a very worldly consideration, less about emotional compatibility, more about status compatibility.
Right.
And the factors considered are incredibly specific.
Let's detail the 4 key factors of kafa, starting with lineage or nasab. How is that prestige factor measured?
Lineage deals with historical and tribal standing. The focus is on ensuring a high-status woman does not marry a low-status man, thereby shaming her family. The sources, quote, Quraysh are equal among themselves, tribe to tribe. This established a clear hierarchy.
So marrying into a historically low tribe could be grounds for an objection.
Exactly. A wali could object, even if the groom was otherwise pious and wealthy.
So social hierarchy is legally acknowledged and enforced here to protect familial reputation. The second factor is religious commitment, Dean. What's the major debate here?
This is crucial. Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf hold that piety is a massive factor. They argue that a woman is significantly shamed by the immorality of her husband, a man who is a public drunkard, known for gambling or openly dishonest. Therefore, that immorality renders him ineligible.
But Imam Muhammad offered a subtle distinction regarding Dean.
He did. Imam Muhammad suggested that religiosity primarily pertains to the hereafter. It only impacts worldly rulings like kafa if the husband's behavior is overtly and explicitly disgraceful in the public sphere.
So a level of moral failing that brings clear, visible social dishonor.
Exactly. Public blasphemy, chronic public drunkenness. Being a quiet sinner is one thing. Bringing public shame to the family is another.
I see. It's not just about his soul, but whether his actions bring visible shame to her family. The third factor is wealth.
The groom must be capable of providing the mar and ongoing sustenance, nafaka. The debate here concerns what kind of wealth matters. Abu Yusuf focused solely on the ability to provide ongoing sustenance. Can he feed, house, and clothe her? If yes, he's eligible.
But that wasn't enough for Abu Hanifa.
No. Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad contended that overall wealth should be considered. If the bride's family is accustomed to a high standard of living and the groom only has enough for subsistence, he's not considered eligible because marrying down would damage her social status.
And finally, social status and profession.
Professions were often categorized by social value. Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad stated that certain respectable trades conferred eligibility, while marrying a woman from a respectable family to a man in a lowly occupation. The sources list butcher, tanner, or weaver could be grounds for annulment by her guardians.
And Abu Hanifa was more relaxed on this.
Generally, yes, unless the occupation was genuinely degrading.
This entire system, Kafa, it leads directly back to the guardian's veto power, even if the Hanafi school allows the adult woman to contract her own marriage.
Yes, if a woman marries someone outside her kafa, meaning a man beneath her status, her guardians have the legal right to petition the judge to annul the marriage. This mechanism is the critical social safety net. It allows the family to intervene and prevent social disgrace from a genuinely inappropriate match, thereby protecting the family honor that the Shafi'i and Maliki schools prioritize so much.
Let's pivot to the financial backbone of the contract, the mar, or dowry. This isn't a purchase price, it's a mandatory financial obligation that symbolizes the husband's honor and his irrevocable commitment to his wife.
It is the wife's inherent and exclusive right, and the legal rulings surrounding mar are incredibly detailed, all designed to ensure that the woman is financially secured regardless of what happens to the marriage.
And here's the first legal insight that really distinguishes Nikah from any other legal transaction. The validity of the marriage contract is entirely separate from the specification of the dowry.
This is a fundamental legal principle. The marriage is valid even if the dowry isn't mentioned at all in the contract.
Or even if they agree to have no dowry.
Or even if the couple explicitly agrees that the wife will receive no dowry. The Sharia imposes the obligation of mar regardless of the contractual terms. It acknowledges the wife's inherent worth and mandatory right. Its omission doesn't invalidate the sanctity of the union.
That is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener.
No.
The marital contract survives the failure of its financial term, unlike a sales contract. Now, regarding specifics, what's the absolute minimum amount of mar?
The Hanafi rule establishes a crucial minimum floor, 10 dirhams. If the parties agree upon a lesser amount, the wife is still legally entitled to 10 dirhams. The minimum ensures that every marriage acknowledges the husband's mandatory responsibility and the wife's established worth.
And the Shafi rule, by contrast, is far less specific.
Right. The Shafi school simply states that the mar must be any valuable amount acceptable in trade without fixing a specific minimum dirham amount. This difference reflects the varying priorities. Hanafi sought specific, enforceable limits, while Shafi focused more on value and custom.
One of the most critical concepts determining when the full mar is due is khalwa, or seclusion. Explain the legal consequence of this.
Khalwa, or valid seclusion, is defined as the couple retiring privately, where there are no physical barriers or legal impediments preventing intimacy. In Hanafi jurisprudence, this seclusion is legally considered equivalent to consummation.
Equivalent.
Equivalent to dukul. So if the couple later separates after such seclusion, the full dowry is due.
Why does the law make this massive leap? Why does the potential for intimacy, defined by seclusion, trigger the full financial obligation, even if they later swear intimacy never occurred?
It's a critical safeguard. It's intended to protect the wife's honor and status post-seclusion. Once a couple has secluded privately, the woman's reputation in society is changed. Whether intimacy physically took place or not, her legal standing is compromised if the marriage fails. The law steps in, declaring the full financial obligation due to protect her and to ensure that the husband takes the act of seclusion as seriously as consummation itself.
All right, let's track the financial rulings based on the outcome of the marriage. What are the three scenarios concerning mar payment and divorce?
The outcomes are categorized by the status of the marriage upon its dissolution.
Okay, scenario 1, consummation or the husband's death.
If the marriage is consummated or if the husband dies while married, the wife receives the full dowry. If the dowry was unspecified, she receives mar al-mithal. the customary dowry of women of her status. It's assessed based on her social standing, piety, beauty, and the typical dowries received by her sisters and paternal aunts.
Okay, scenario 2. Divorce before consummation, but the dowry was specified.
If the husband divorces his wife before consummation and a specific amount of mahr had been agreed upon, she is legally entitled to precisely half of that agreed-upon dowry. This ruling comes explicitly from the Quran.
And scenario 3. Divorce before consummation, but the dowry was unspecified.
If there was no dowry specified and divorce occurs before consummation, she receives no mahr, but she is entitled to a compensation known as muta.
And muta is mandatory.
It's mandatory compensation designed to be a kind and thoughtful parting gift that eases the separation and ensures the woman leaves with dignity.
Let's detail the specifics of muta. How is this compensation valued?
It's based directly on the husband's financial capacity. Heavier for the wealthy, lighter for the poor. It must be fair. And the sources provide remarkable specificity, detailing the standard form of muta as narrated from companions like Aisha and Ibn Abbas. It consists of 3 specific garments.
Garments.
Yes. A dress, a dir, a head cover, a kimar, and a cloak milafah.
It's incredible that massive legal texts dedicate a segment to defining a divorce compensation gift as 3 specific items of clothing. What does that specificity tell us about the material standards and legislative intent of that era?
It tells us 2 things. First, the law ensures that even the poorest woman leaves the marriage with guaranteed basic dignity and the means to cover herself, ensuring respect in society. And second, it limits judicial discretion by providing a concrete, verifiable standard, something tangible that a judge can enforce rather than just an abstract concept of fairness.
Is there a cap on its value?
Yes. Crucially, the value of this compensation is legally capped. It cannot exceed half of the mahr al-mithal.
The legal texts also cover adjustments to the mahr after the contract and how the law handles forbidden or vague assets. First, adjustments. What happens if the husband increases the mahr or the wife reduces it after the contract is finalized?
If the husband unilaterally increases the dowry, that increase becomes instantly obligatory upon him.
Okay.
Conversely, if the wife willingly and freely reduces the dowry, that reduction is valid, which reaffirms her full financial autonomy over her own wealth.
Now, let's discuss the edge case where the dowry is set as a forbidden item, say a barrel of wine or pork. What happens to the contract and the dowry obligation?
This case is a fantastic test of that principle we talked about, that the marriage contract survives financial failure. If the dowry is set as forbidden items, the marriage contract remains absolutely valid.
The marriage is fine.
The marriage is fine. However, the dowry condition itself is void. And since the specified mahr is invalid, the wife automatically receives mahr al-mithal instead.
If the man and woman had entered a sales contract and the payment was specified as alcohol, the entire sale would be nullified.
Completely nullified.
But in marriage, the union survives the illegal term.
Exactly. The sanctity and social necessity of Nikah take absolute precedence over the legality of the financial terms. It prevents chaos and ensures lineage continues unimpaired.
Finally, let's look at the disagreement over vague or variable dowry, which highlights the conflicting approaches to contractual interpretation. What if the husband marries the woman with a variable dowry? 1,000 dirhams if he stays in this town, 2,000 if he moves her out of town.
Here, we see the scholars split into 3 camps, beautifully illustrating the legal tension between contractual terms and customary fairness.
Okay, who's first?
Imam Abu Hanifa. He took the stance of pragmatic fairness. He ruled that if the lesser amount, the 1,000, is enacted, she gets 1,000. But if the higher amount, the 2,000, is enacted, the contractual term is too vague. So, she receives mahr al-mithal, the customary dowry, but constrained between the stated minimum of 1,000 and maximum of 2,000.
So he applies the specific term only when it's the minimum, otherwise defaulting to the customary standard. What about the literalists?
Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad represented the school of contractual literalism. They argued that both conditions are valid and she receives the exact amount specified, whether it's 1,000 or 2,000, depending on the outcome. They prioritize upholding the terms as agreed upon by the parties.
And the third view?
And finally, Imam Zufar took the most conservative approach. He ruled that the variable nature of the dowry makes the entire condition invalid, regardless of the outcome. Therefore, she receives mahr al-mithal, similarly constrained between the stated maximum and minimum. This just shows that even over a simple number, 4 different possible legal outcomes existed depending on which scholar you followed.
The legal system also has to account for contracts made on someone's behalf, bringing in the concept of agency, or wakala. How is an agent viewed in Hanafi law, and what specific ruling flows from that perspective?
In Hanafi fiqh, the agent is viewed merely as a conduit, a safir wa muabar, a messenger or a facilitator. They are not a direct party or beneficiary. And this perspective allows for a highly specific and unique Hanafi ruling. A man can be authorized by a woman to act as her agent and marry her to himself, provided witnesses are present.
Wait, how can one person be the conduit for the contract and simultaneously be the eventual spouse? Isn't that a massive conflict of interest that would invalidate the procedure?
That's exactly the challenge raised by the dissenting scholars. This ruling is explicitly rejected by Shafi'i and Zufar, who argue that in any standard contract like a sale, one person can't be both the executor and the recipient.
But the Hanafi school makes an exception for marriage.
Exactly. Because the agent is only facilitating the transfer of walaya, or authority, and not transferring physical wealth, the sanctity of the marital contract allows this dual role.
Now let's explore the profound concept of the suspended contract known as fuduli and an authorized contract executed by a third party.
This concept is arguably the philosophical cornerstone of Hanafi legal pragmatism. If an unauthorized person like a slave who contracts his marriage without his master's permission or any third party, a fuduli, enters into a marriage contract, the contract is not immediately void. It is instead suspended. Mokuf.
Suspended, meaning it just hangs in limbo, lacking legal effect. What good is that?
It allows for judicial flexibility. It has no immediate legal effect, but it's not dead. It remains suspended until the authorized party, the master, the bride, or the groom, later ratifies it. If they ratify it, it becomes retroactively valid from the moment the fuduli contracted it.
So it prioritizes the intent of the parties over the strict procedure.
Absolutely. It allows the marriage to be salvaged if it aligns with the party's eventual wishes.
So the Hanafi school says, the procedure was wrong, but the intention was good. We will save the contract. What does the Shafi'i school say about the same scenario?
The Shafi'i position holds that such unauthorized contracts are always immediately void. The Shafi'i philosophy mandates strict adherence to process. If the person signing the contract lacked the authority to do so at that exact moment, the contract is null and it can't be resurrected later.
It reinforces that core difference. Hanafi seeks to salvage contracts pragmatically. Shafi'i demands procedural perfection.
Exactly.
And this philosophy of the suspended contract also applies heavily to minors and slaves, determining their right to annulment.
It does. Regarding minors, a marriage arranged by a father or a grandfather for a minor child is considered binding. The child has no right to reject it later upon reaching puberty. The law assumes the father or grandfather is acting with complete, guaranteed altruism.
Incapable of error, basically.
In a legal sense, yes. That's the assumption.
But if the marriage is arranged by other relatives, like an uncle or a brother?
Then the child retains the right to annul the marriage upon reaching puberty. Why? Because that assumption of guaranteed altruism is removed. An uncle or brother may have their own motives or potential self-interest. The law protects the child by granting them the option of rejection once they reach maturity.
And finally, a very specific ruling regarding the rights of a newly freed slave woman.
An emancipated slave woman retains the option to annul the marriage upon gaining her freedom. This option is rooted in the tradition of Barrera, a newly freed slave woman who was granted this choice. This right is critical because her status as a slave previously limited her ability to choose or fully understand her legal options.
The legal text must also grapple with the interaction between Islamic law and non-Muslim marriage contracts, especially upon conversion. The guiding principle seems to be non-accountability for adherence to Islamic marriage laws before conversion.
That is the foundation. If a Christian or Jewish couple, for instance, married using items forbidden in Islam as dowry, or if they married without witnesses acts that would invalidate a Muslim contract, Abu Hanifa generally ruled their marriage valid under the legal framework of their former faith community.
So their pre-conversion marriage is respected, but what happens the moment that non-Muslim couple converts to Islam?
Upon conversion, certain fundamental Islamic rules take immediate precedence. If their marriage involved a prohibited relative that is considered absolutely prohibited in Islam, such as a mother or a daughter, immediate separation is mandated. The conversion instantly imposes the prohibition.
And regarding the financial assets, the dowry set as prohibited items like alcohol or pork, which were legal in their former faith.
This involves a fascinating financial assessment. Imam Abu Hanifa, respecting the validity of the contract under their former religion, ruled that the woman is entitled to those specific items or their monetary value upon conversion.
I see.
Since those items were permissible wealth in their former faith, and the contract was valid then, the woman's right to them is upheld.
That seems very lenient, respecting the original contract over the immediate prohibition of the item itself.
It's a remarkable degree of legal respect for prior arrangements. However, here again, Yusuf and Muhammad often took a slightly stricter approach. They favored the retroactive imposition of Islamic standards, often mandating mar al-mithal, or the item's monetary value, trying to align the final financial settlement as closely as possible with Islamic standards upon conversion.
Finally, let's touch on the mandate for justice in polygamy, al-qism. What is the core obligation for a man with multiple wives?
The mandate requires a man with multiple free wives to maintain equal allocation of time, specifically physical presence and nights. The obligation is rooted in a desire to ensure justice and prevent undue suffering. The sources cite the hadith where the Prophet warned that inclining unjustly toward one wife in allocation will result in consequences on the Day of Judgment.
Yet the law recognizes an immediate human exception built into this rule regarding emotional bias.
Crucially, the hadith itself clarifies that the man is not held accountable for emotional inclination or love. It states, "O Allah, this is my division regarding what I control, so do not hold me accountable for what I do not control."
My heart.
My heart, exactly. The legal system limits its jurisdiction to external controllable acts of justice, not internal uncontrollable emotions.
And if a man has a free wife and a bondwoman wife, how does the allocation ratio shift?
If one wife is free and the other is a bondwoman, the free wife receives 2/3 and the bondwoman receives 1/3 of the allocation time. This reflected the reduced marital rights and obligations inherent in the status of a bondwoman during that period.
And a final human touch. A wife can willingly give up her allocated time to another wife.
That waiver is permissible and recorded, famously by Saada bint Zama, who allocated her night to Isha. It's important to note that the law confirms this waiver is not permanent. A wife can reclaim that right later if she changes her mind, as the allocated time is an ongoing right, not a fixed debt.
We've covered a massive, intricate legal landscape today. I mean, from the required use of the past tense in the contract to the precise definition of compensation when a marriage ends without consummation.
Indeed. We've seen that Islamic jurisprudence, particularly the Hanafi school, provides a meticulously detailed system designed not just for moral governance, but for societal stability. The debates we highlighted over non-just witnesses, the autonomy of the adult woman, the complex rules of Mar, they reveal a dynamic history of legal minds balancing procedural perfection against social reality.
My final takeaway for you, the learner, centers on the unique legal status of the marital contract itself. We saw repeatedly that the Nikah structure remains valid even when critical financial elements fail.
Like an illegal dowry.
Exactly, or an unspecified more. This profound difference highlights that in this tradition, the legal sanctity and social necessity of the union always supersede the commercial or financial details. It's a contract that the law desperately seeks to preserve.
That resilience is the core legal insight. And to leave you with one final thought, based on our sources regarding the absolute authority of the father, we noted that if a father or grandfather marries a minor daughter to a slave, it is considered valid in the Hanafi view because it may serve a greater interest.
That is highly provocative. What does the Hanafi school believe this greater interest might be? Historically, does this suggest the law was prioritizing the stabilization of potential economic hardship, or maybe securing the child's protection within a powerful household, even at the cost of her freedom? It forces us to ask, what was the historical balancing act between assumed familial authority and the child's inherent rights within that early Islamic legal society? That is certainly something worth exploring further as you continue your reading.
A powerful question to end on.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of Islamic jurisprudence. We hope you feel thoroughly informed. We'll see you next time.